Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Dads, papas, fathers, we all need them. Not a one of us would be here if not for them. Two mothers cannot produce an offspring, last I checked, despite what any of the woke progressive, quote, scientists would have you believe. Beginning in the 1960s, America and too many other Western nations experienced something we know as the women's liberation movement. I realized that it really began decades earlier with the women's suffrage movement of the late 1800s up to the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1920, along with flappers, and of course, we also had the women's labor movement in the 1940s as Rosie the Riveter became the now famous piece of American propaganda. So, before anyone watching labels this puppet as any of the popular leftist titles for anyone who stands up for what is obvious and common sense, realize that I am not against women voting or working in factories. I am, however, about to state some things that need to be stated despite what you may or may not believe and whether or not it hurts anyone's feelings. Look around you today and you cannot deny that much of what we could call the developed world suffers with many a malady. You have broken families, you have filled to the brim prisons, you have sky-high divorce rates, you have increased incidents of innocent infants murdered in vitro. On top of that, we see much mental illness all around, and too much of it goes untreated. Hold on, puppet. Where are you taking us with this conversation? Okay, my loyal viewers, when exactly did many of these maladies begin to become problematic in much of the modern world? Well, some things were not well documented up until more recent times, but it is safe to say that far too much of what I just mentioned began to substantially worsen with the advent of the women's liberation movement, and at the same time when it became popular to put men down as a means of supposed humor, especially fathers and father figures. Like it or like it not, there are genetic and physical, mental, and spiritual differences between the two God-given genders. In spite of the WNBA and every woke effort to paint women as fully equal to men, they are not and can never be. Earth shattered, I realize for some, but just common sense for many others like me. And friends and colleagues, I think it is safe to state that often ill-guided efforts to try to force us to believe that women and men are equal have only far too often led us into other social experiments that have done more real harm than they have good. Yes, these are the same insane people who have told us that men can have babies and women can do any job a man can do in completely equal manner and with completely equal results. And that, my fellow viewers, is a nice segue into what this puppet is really trying to get across in this video. The fact that fathers and strong masculine father figures are, in fact, highly important to the nuclear family and society as a whole, in spite of what any feminist pundits have tried to force down the collective throats of us for multiple decades. The psychiatric journals have all stated that psychopathy can be an inborn trait, but it could also be learned trait through a traumatic childhood or neglect, whereby the parenting of said psychopaths was abusive in the least and downright criminal in the worst. The same can also be said for something we call narcissistic personality disorder. Far too many have suffered at the hands of people with delusions of grandeur, be it a boss, acquaintance, spouse, or a relative, and friends and colleagues. Those narcissists are largely formed in childhood, where their father either ran off or was physically present but emotionally checked out. Another societal ill directly linked to lack of a strong positive masculine energy emitting father in the household. Well, that would be homosexuality. I know we hear far too often the misguided claims that people are born that way. Well, this puppet is here to tell you with a resounding no that no one is born with homosexual tendencies, none whatsoever. Yes, my viewers, homosexuality is far too often comes from misguided or even abusive youth. The formative years for a child are key in modeling for them, either boy or girl, what their real roles in life will look like. But you see, a boy who lacks a strong masculine father in his life has no one to show him, other than a mother in far too many cases. And that, kids and cousins, gives the developing mind and psyche of the boy the wrong triggers and signals. A woman cannot ever properly raise a boy into his proper masculine role as an adult, regardless of what any woke psychoanalysts try to tell you. Instead, this arrangement far too often leads to effeminate men, men who lack the courage and bravery they need to properly function in life, men who lack the ability to properly lead a wife and family as God designed them to be. The same can be said for lesbians. These are largely attributable to dysfunctional and or missing fathers. A father who either abuses his daughter or trains her up in masculine hobbies and traits often ends up creating a lesbian. Absentee fathers or runaway fathers can also create lesbian daughters out of anger and frustration built up inside of her to the point that she builds a deep-seated hatred for all males based on his actions. But family and friends, all we see on sitcoms and even dramas these days are the fathers and families being ridiculed and made out to be buffoons. Even watch commercial advertisements on lamestream television and you will see all kind of blatant and sometimes subtle digs at fathers. Why would we want to do that as a culture when we see the adverse impact of absent or dysfunctional fathers all around us? Look around. What do we see? Many divorces happen due to constant conflict and agitation in the relationship. That is mostly driven by people who grew up with trauma in their childhoods, and that is too often driven by either a missing or malfunctioning father. Kids who had no father around, either physically or emotionally, have to come up with coping and defense mechanisms in their lives to survive. Often for children who are neglected or ignored, they can come up with fantasies of grandeur. They can also see that the love they receive is conditional. In other words, they only receive praise or affection if they do a chore or accomplish something seen as good. The lesson they quickly learn is to protect themselves at all costs because no one is looking out for them. They move ahead many years into adulthood, and you can see how these traits are landmines waiting to explode in any relationships they enter into. Compound this with the fact that some cultures are rife with absentee fathers and even alcoholic or abusive fathers, and you begin to see why society overall is suffering so much in modern times. Overstuffed prisons are largely full of men and women who lacked strong, healthy, masculine leadership in their childhoods. It really boils down to that, like it or not. And now I will divert temporarily to a subject I discussed in last week's video, Judaism. You see, many Hollywood production studios and even ad agencies are owned and headed up by moneyed, immoral Jews. Yes, these are the ones directing the sitcoms and television ads to be as anti-father figure as they can get. They are also the ones rubber stamping movies that treat fathers as buffoons and otherwise horrible cretins. So here we are, folks, in a land of exponentially high divorce rates, incarceration rates, broken family rates, and escalating numbers of homosexual and lesbian women. And so many sit around scratching their collective heads saying, well, why are these things happening all around us? And without a clue. Well, this puppet came today to inform you that these can all be directly attributed to either non-existent or abusive fathers. It is as simple. Want to know why large numbers of young black men are incarcerated? Only look at the number of urban black homes missing a father. This is not rocket science, kids. So, has this puppet said anything this evening that has struck a chord with you, agitated a part of your brain? Well, that is good. Perhaps I have said some things to you that you do not even agree with. That is fine. Post your comments and allow me to read where I possibly went astray. Open discourse is healthy, I do believe. Good night, my loyal viewers, and sleep well.